أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Verily, all praise is due to Allah. We praise Him, we seek His aid, and we ask for His forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evils of our own selves and from the evils of our own actions. And whomsoever Allah guides, none can misguide. And whomsoever Allah leaves astray, none can guide back to the correct path. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We testify there is no deity worthy of our worship except for Allah, who is alone, no partnership, and never has and never will be another. And we bear witness that Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, is the last and the final prophet of Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Brothers and sisters, friends and family, everybody tuning into the live stream and everybody joining us for the Zoom meeting. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you for joining us again for the Sunday discussion of the book of Those Promised Paradise by Noura Durkee. Today we'll be continuing starting at page 113 and doing the chapters and reading the chapters of Bilal ibn Rabah, the Abyssinian, and Fatima Bint Muhammad. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So it mentions in Al-Bukhari as well as Muslim chapters 2 and Hadith 250. I heard during the night the sound of your footsteps before me in paradise, in reference to Bilal ibn Rabah, the Abyssinian, about his forementioning inside of paradise. So Allah's Messenger ﷺ once said to Bilal, tell me, what did you do for the sake of Islam, for which you hope to receive a good reward? I dreamt I heard your footsteps going before me in the garden. And Bilal responded, I did not do any Islamic deed for which I hope to get any benefit but this, that when I perform complete ablution during the night or day, I observe the prayer with that purification which Allah had ordered me to pray. In other words, he hoped for reward simply by doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had asked any person to do, praying with ablution for that prayer. However, if we study his life, we can also imagine the certitude and devotion he must have had in performing that sort of prayer, because Bilal was a humble man. He did not seek recognition for his deeds. He did not make a lot of noise in conversation and discussion. And the Sahaba remembered his voice as the most beautiful, and he made the first adhan over Medina. And later his voice was heard over Mecca, coming from on top of the Kaaba itself. And Bilal's voice is then known as being the voice of comfort, of security, of longing, of belief, and of Islam. In regards about the history of Bilal, Bilal was born a slave in Mecca, the property of Umayyah ibn Khalaf. He lived a very difficult life, as did the slaves during the pre-Islamic days. His master wanted to keep him strong and alive, but ignored his human rights and his dignity, as most slavers did. And he was valuable as property, and that was all. And when Rasulullah ﷺ began teaching Islam to the people, Bilal was astonished to hear his remarkable views. Slaves were to be treated well. They were supposed to be clothed and fed just like their masters and not overworked. And masters were even supposed to help their slaves with the heavy work. In other words, slaves might be owned as servants, but had to be treated as other people, or the same people as some people in the family. So it was a great blessing and a gift for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to set them free and to guide this. And Islam also contained deep and beautiful messages to all human beings, whether slave or free, and describing their relationship to one another and to their creator. And Bilal's heart responded to all of these messages, and he immediately embraced Islam. He did not, however, keep his conversion a secret. And Umayyah was a cruel man, a dictatorial tyrant, and he had no intentions of letting a slave of his adopt this new religion. He himself hated Islam because it taught attitudes which he did not want society to adopt, and he did not want to hear warnings of the day of judgment, and he also did not want to hear about the dangers of being arrogant and rich. He liked things the way how they were because they benefited him by those sort of actions, and he was certain he could change the mind of a slave by committing torture upon him. So the tortures that were inflicted on Bilal were the typical kind of torment inflicted on many of the unprotected or the poor or the enslaved new Muslims at that time. He was taken out of the desert in the hot sun, dressed in a suit of armor, and made to lie there at midday until the heated metal then scorched his son. And when this didn't force him to renounce his new religion, a huge boulder was placed on his chest. And while it slowly crushed him, he was asked all sorts of sarcastic questions like, do you believe in the goddess Alat? Alat? And do you believe in the goddess Oza? And why doesn't your God come and save you now? And Bilal, who was at the time deep in suffering as the heavy stone burned through his skin, repeated over and over and over again, say Allah is one, Allah is one, one, one. And the tormentors then gathered. They took turns and still could get nothing more out of him. And of course, they didn't want to kill him, that they could not give up either. Instead, they were determined to come up with a more severe method of torture, and Rasulullah SAW, seeing Bilal's intense suffering, urged him to be patient and prayed for his salvation. And one day, Abu Bakr anhu came upon the proceeding, appalled at what had witnessed or what he had witnessed. Abu Bakr decided to take matters into his own hands, and he approached Umayyah and asked him, are you going to kill the slave for nothing? Instead, you should sell him to me. And Umayyah said, for a good price, I would be glad to be rid of him. He said furiously, and Abu Bakr then said, I will pay your price. Who always put his fortune at the service of the Muslims, Abu Bakr paid for him. So he then became the owner of Bilal, according to that purchase, and then set him free. Alhamdulillah. So Bilal was the first one to give the adhan. Bilal continued to study and work with the Muslims and soon immigrated to Medina, where he made the salah with everyone in Rasulullah's masjid that they had set in Medina. And there was one problem, however, that there was no way to tell the people when the time was for prayer. Many were far away from the fields or at their homes and would come to prayer too early or too late. And Rasulullah thought of using a horn like the one used by the Jews, or a bell which was used by the Christians. Someone else thought that a wooden clapper, but that wasn't satisfactory either. But one night, Abdullah ibn Zayd, one of the Ansar, had a dream. The next day, he told it to Rasulullah, where it's quoted saying, in my dream, a man wearing 2 green garments passed by me, carrying a wooden clapper in his hands. I said to him, O slave of Allah, will you sell the wooden clapper to me? He asked, what will you do with it? He said, we will call the people to ritual prayer with it. And he responded saying, shall I not show you a better way? And he inquired about it, what way is that? And he then answered, you should say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And Hayal Salah, Hayal Falah, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. And Rasulullah said that the dream was inspired, and he told Abdullah to go to Bilal, whose voice was strong and beautiful, and teach him the words that he heard in a dream. And the woman who lived near the masjid said to him, my house is on the highest ground here. Use it and its roof to call the people to the salah. And after that, every day before the dawn, Bilal would climb to her rooftop and await the first light. He used to stand and stretch out his arms and pray, O Allah, I praise you and ask for your help for the Quraysh, that they may accept your deen. And after that dua, he made the call to the prayer. And thus Bilal became the first caller to ritual prayer in all of the history of Islam. So Bilal became one of the closest Sahaba to Rasulullah SAW. His beautiful voice became identified to all of their hearts and all of their minds with those of the early days in Medina, which was so full of hope and struggle and so rich in meaning. And whenever people complimented him on his voice or would say anything, however, he was a very humble person, and he would say, I'm only a man who was a slave until yesterday. And in regards about divine justice, Bilal participated in several early battles, and when he was fighting in the Battle of Badr, he came face to face with his former master. He challenged him, they fought, and Bilal killed Umayyah. And afterwards, Abu Bakr commented, "Oh Bilal, how sweet is Allah's justice." And once after the Battle of Khaybar. Rasulullah SAW asked for a volunteer to keep watch until the dawn so that others may sleep, and Bilal said that he would, and he prayed as long as he could and almost made it till dawn, but fell asleep before his watch was through, and everyone woke up to the heat of the rising sun, but they had missed Fajr, and it was dawn, and they began to ride. And when Rasulullah SAW had gone a short distance on his camel, he stopped, dismounted, and asked everyone to make wudu. And he told Bilal to give the adhan, and after they prayed, he told the people, if you forget your salah, perform it when you remember it, for Allah has said, perform the salah for my remembrance. In regards for Bilal's high recommendation, so Bilal remained unmarried and spent all of his time in the masjid. And finally, Rasulullah SAW revealed that it was time for him to have a family. One day, Abd al-Rahman came to him and said that his sister was of the age to marry. And then he asked if he could suggest a suitable man. How about Bilal? Asked Rasulullah SAW. Abd al-Rahman didn't say anything, and a few days later, he came back and asked the same question. And Rasulullah SAW responded again, how about Bilal? And Abdul al-Rahman didn't say anything. A few days later, he came back and asked the same question. And Rasulullah SAW said, how about Bilal, for a third time, offering once more. And this time, Abdul al-Rahman replied, Messenger of Allah SAW, my sister would be happy to be the wife of a man you hold in such high esteem. So the two were then happily married afterwards. The next section here is Bilal learns a lesson in trust. So Bilal was responsible for managing the expenses of Rasulullah SAW, and when asked how it was done, he told this story. He never kept back anything for future use. I arranged money for him whenever a needy person, whether hungry or naked, came to him. He would send him to me, and I would then arrange for his needs by borrowing money from somebody. Once a mushrik came to me and said, look here, I have a lot of money to spare. You don't borrow money from anyone else. And whenever you need it, come straight to me. Pleasantly surprised, I exclaimed, this is fine indeed. And I began to borrow money from him to meet the needs of Rasulullah SAW. And one day after I had made my wudu and was about to call the adhan, the same mushrik, accompanied by some people, came and shouted, I'm not going to say that, but he's referencing regarding his black skin. When I attended to him, he began to insult me using filthy language and said, how many days are left of this month? And he said, is it close to the end? And he then snapped that there were only 4 days left. And if I could not return the money, he would make me a slave to pay the debt, and I would be herding the sheep once more. And of course, Bilal, being very distressed by this, went to tell Rasulullah SAW that he was going to disappear for a while as there was no money to pay the man. He then went home, collected his sword, his shield, and his shoes, and waited for the morning to leave Medina. And he then recounted, saying, just before the dawn, somebody came to me and said, hurry up, Rasulullah SAW wants you. And I hurried to the masjid and found 4 loaded camels sitting near Rasulullah SAW. And he said, good news, Bilal. Allah has made arrangements for clearing your debts. Take these camels with their load. The chief of Fidak has sent them as a gift to me. I thanked Allah, took the camels, and cleared up all of the debts. And to Bilal's surprise, there was money left over even after the debts were paid. And Rasulullah SAW reminded in the masjid as Bilal gave away the remaining money, he refused to go home until all of it was spent. SubhanAllah. Next, it mentions regarding Bilal's great grief. So after the death of Rasulullah SAW, Bilal was too sad to stay in Medina because he could not bring himself to make the adhan anymore. He set off into the world to teach Islam and to make jihad, inner and outer, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he traveled a great deal and lived in several places away from Medina. And one night he had a dream in which Rasulullah SAW appeared to him and said, oh, Bilal, how is it that you never visit me? And the next day after the morning salah, he set out immediately for Medina. And when he got there, he met Rasulullah's grandsons, Hassan and Hussein, and they were pleased with him to make the adhan, as he had done in the days of Rasulullah when he was present in the city. And he loved them so much that he could not refuse them. And he climbed once again on the rooftop and called as he had before. It touched the hearts of the people too deeply to remember the good old days, and both men and women came running out of their houses, weeping and grieving. And a few days later, Bilal left Medina again and died later in Damascus in the 20th year after the Hijrah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower his peace and blessings upon this humble and courageous and famous, wonderful man. I mean. Next that comes up is regarding Fatima bint Muhammad. So Fatima is the mistress of the women in paradise, as mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, chapter 5, uh, hadith 29 here, 529. So I'm gonna constantly go back and forth. Fatima and Fatima. Uh, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive me. Fatima was the youngest daughter of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She was born the year of the Kaaba when it was rebuilt, when her father put the black stone in its place in the wall, and the first revelation descended when she was only 5 years old. And she grew up learning about Islam as it was being revealed, taught by the best of teachers. And the years of Fatima's youth were difficult for the Muslims. Once, while her father was being tormented as he prayed by the Kaaba, the remains of a sheep were thrown on his head and his shoulders, and she came and cleaned it off, filled with sorrow that her father should be treated like this. But fortunately, she lived to see positive changes for the Muslims, as was with her father when he entered Mecca triumphantly at the head of his huge army. And Fatima's mother died when she was about 15. Tremendous loss for her, as Khadija was a source of strength and stability for the whole family, and her sisters Ayman and all of the close Sahabas were always a great amount of source of support for her. And although her three brothers had died in infancy, Zayd and Ali were like brothers to her, protective and comforting and strong. And it was the presence of her father, however, that truly influenced her life. So and she loved him, and he loved her, and with a love that surpassed the typical love of a parent and a child, and entered the realm of the spiritual love. And the women of the family immigrated to Medina soon after Rasulullah. When they had lived there about half a year, Ali proposed marriage to Fatima. And one story relates that Ali, radiallahu anhu, in order to provide mihr, a dowry, sold one of his camels, and Rasulullah then told him, invest 2/3 of the money in scent and 1/3 in clothes. And another story recounts when Ali proposed, Rasulullah asked Ali what dowry he planned to give Fatima, and Ali replied saying, I do not have anything to give to her as dowry. And Rasulullah then asked, where is your coat of mail which I gave you? Ali responded saying, I have it. And Rasulullah instructed him to give this to Fatima, and he did so, and this became her dowry. So for the wedding feast, Sa'ad of the Ansar offered a ram, and a group of Ansar collected some millet. Fatima was dressed in 2 robes, the first decorated with silver rings covered with saffron, and when she entered Ali's house, she noticed a sheep skin on a bench, a cushion stuffed with fiber, a water skin, a sieve, and a napkin and a cup. And Ali explained later, I married Fatima when I did not have a bed except for a ram skin, and we slept on it at night and fed the camel on it by day. And so their life together began, poverty in this world, but the knowledge of the great riches in the next. So being the devoted daughter, Fatima had 5 children with Ali, Al-Hassan, Al-Hussein, Kulthum, Zainab, and Muhsin, who died as a baby, and Rasulullah loved them very much, and Fatima often brought them to visit him. And he would let them ride on his shoulders, sometimes allowing them to sit on his shoulders or back while he was leading the salah, as kids often do. He showered them with hugs and kisses, and they in turn adored him. And Fatima's life was a short one, spent in reverence in simplicity. And she knew fully that the life of this world was in passing, and that all the true attention should go to the next. And yet she married, she bore children, and spent her days in hard physical labor. And she also listened intently to the Quran as it came down, and was open to new worlds of understanding. And she was present with the other women at the time of the conquest of Mecca, and was sitting in the red leather tent of Rasulullah on the day when he forgave the people of Mecca and accepted their Islam. And all her life, she was a faithful and inspiring daughter, wife, mother, and friend. And during many of the battles, Fatima cared for the wounded and brought water for those who were thirsty. And on the day of Uhud, she came out to the battlefield to treat her father's injuries, and she placed spider webs over the cut on his head and cleaned his other wounds. And after the battle, Rasulullah then rejoined his family. And as a gesture of respect and gratitude, he handed Fatima his sword and said, "Wash the blood from this, daughter, for by Allah it has served me well today." And her husband Ali also handed her sword, saying, "This one too, wash the blood from it, for by Allah it has served me well today." So, regarding being one of the best of women, Fatima is one of the most loved and honored women in all of Islamic history. Rasulullah SAW gave her the highest compliment that could be given when he said the best women in the world were four: Maryam, the mother of Isa; Asiya, the wife of Firaun; Khadija, his first wife; and Fatima, his daughter. And he also said, "Fatima is a part of me, and anyone who makes her angry makes me angry." And after some time, Rasulullah SAW gave Fatima and her husband a house very close to his own home so that he could be close to her. He visited her often, and her home was the first place he would go after prayer or when he returned to the city from a journey or a battle. And he sent her food whenever he could, and she would do the same for him. And Fatima lived during a time in history when daughters were often scorned, or even worse, sometimes killed by their fathers or other family members, yet she was so beloved by her father that their bond became a new example of an admirable father and daughter relationship. And when Rasulullah SAW lay sick, he called for Fatima to him and whispered a secret in her ear that caused her to weep. Then he asked her to come back, and he whispered another secret in her other ear, which caused her to laugh. And Aisha was present for this, and then later asked Fatima curiously what Rasulullah SAW had said to make her react so emotionally, whereas she replied saying, "I will not divulge his secret." But after Rasulullah SAW had died, Fatima explained, "O Father, who has responded to the call of the Lord, who has invited him, O Father, whose dwelling place is the garden of paradise, O Father, we convey this news of your death to Jibreel." And after Rasulullah SAW death, Aisha asked Fatima again what he had said to her, and this time she told about that secret. And in the first secret, Rasulullah SAW told me that every year Jibreel met him and repeated the Quran to him once, but this year he came twice and repeated it to him. And when he told me, "I think that my end is near, I will be the best precursor for you," hearing this, I wept. And in his second secret, he informed me that I would be the first of his family to follow him. And upon hearing this, I laughed, saying in Al-Bahari 562. And indeed, only 6 months after the death of her blessed father, Fatima got up one day, washed, asked that her bed be placed in the courtyard, bade farewell to her husband, lay down in clean linen, and later died. And Fatima was the first woman to be buried on a covered bier. And she had requested this because she felt a woman should not be uncovered even in death. One of the women had seen a covered bier in Abyssinia and had shown it to her, and she liked this idea very much. And after Fatima's burial, this method was used for all the women in Medina. And everyone in Medina mourned the death of Fatima deeply, and many were profoundly affected by the loss of such a pure and wonderful presence. And she was honored as the woman who is most closely resembled both in a physical manner and a spiritual sense her father, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower his peace and blessings on the Prophet Sallallahu and his beloved daughter, Fatima. Ameen. And with that, we come to a close for today's reading. Jazakallah khairan everyone for joining in with us. And we'll pick up, well, actually the following Sunday, we may need somebody to cover that, inshallah. If anybody is interested in doing so, we'll make the announcement for that. But we may take a break for possibly 2 weeks, inshallah. But we'll see how it goes, inshallah. Allahumma subhanahu wa bihamdi ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.